Hello and welcome to Terrain Oddity. My name is Jay and we are back with the Paw Hammer series, which is essentially trying to get you some basic terrain on an extreme budget, so as cheap as possible. Now these trees, I reckon we can probably make 10 of them for approximately £6 in the UK, and you still have a lot of material left over. And then if you bought more of the scourers for say like £1.50, you could get another 5, so you'd have enough material in that sense. I'll try and answer some frequently asked questions maybe at the end. I would just like to say, if you like this video, press like, and if you're not subscribed and you're interested in terrain, please do that. And the reason I like doing this Paw Hammer series, essentially my raison d'etre now that I'm going to say, which is my reason for existing, is I want to help people make better battlefields. And in the Paw Hammer series, that's going from nothing to something on an extreme budget. So that's what we're doing. So we're going to look at these cheap trees. As I said, I'll answer some questions at the end. Let's get on with showing you how I made it. Before we go into this though, if you do want to see a slightly more advanced version of this tree, a better, nicer looking one, but it is more expensive, I will put a link up in the card. That's sort of like the basic tree after this, if you ask me, but I'll put a link to that in the corner. So there's not exactly a lot of materials to this, but the trunk of the tree is the first material we're going to look at, and that is a hardwood dowel that I'm using now. Hardwood dowels are very cheap. You can get them for, I think I got this one from B&Q. It's like 1 meter long, and I think it's 9mm wide. Essentially, I got that big stick for about £1, and what you're seeing on screen is only half of it because I had to snap it because it was so long. I think you get like 1 meter for £1 basically. Now the one downside to hardwood dowels is you can't really texture them. A lot of people will try and take a wire brush to this kind of stuff and try and texture it, but the hardwood dowels do not texture at all. They are literally too hard. Now you can buy a soft wood dowel, which is sort of like a balsa dowel, and you can texture those with wire brushes, but they generally equate to about £1 a pop for like a 30cm dowel at best, whereas this is like £1 and you can get like 10, maybe even more trees out of it, depending on how high you want to go. So anyway, the dowel is a hardwood dowel because we're on this budget. I was actually tempted to try and like use pencils and stuff, whatever I had lying around, but I had these dowels, so I thought we'd use that. And all I'm going to do is paint it brown. What I would recommend is I paint it brown first, but you might have to go back over it later, depending on if you've like rubbed it off with your hands or something like that. I paint it brown just with a brush and some basic brown paint. If you can, just like try and prop it. You might want to leave both ends unpainted so you can actually prop it up against something and not get paint everywhere. I didn't do that, and I sort of had to hold it for a little bit longer than I would have liked, but there you have it. And then whilst it's drying, essentially, we're going to move on to the canopy of the tree. Now, the canopy of this tree are essentially like these green scouring pads. It's not new, it's not revolutionary. I know Luke KPS has done this, Black Magic Craft has done this. This isn't a revolutionary material, but they are essentially just green scouring pads. So I bought mine from Tesco in the UK for £1.50, and I got like 5 of these sheets. Yeah, pretty decent value, so you can probably get it cheaper if you go to like a pound shop, something like that. And all we're going to do is cut them to size. Now, in that you can do pine trees, whatever kind of trees you want, but I just wanted to go with sort of like the most classic looking tree that I could, which you might imagine as sort of like a circular tree, but it's a bit hard to do that with this. So what I did is more like the Christmas tree kind of pine kind of shape. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to cut out squares first, and I don't know how many you necessarily need. Just cut it to like whatever you think is right, depending on the height of the tree you want and the scale you're using, etc. But we're going to just cut out big squares and then gradually get smaller squares, if that makes sense. So now, obviously, one sheet here, you might want to do all your big ones, and now another sheet, you might want to do your smaller ones or what have you. But just cut your squares and sort of line them up like they're in the right size order, like biggest to smallest, smallest to biggest, whatever you want to say. And then what we're going to do is actually start trimming them. Now, you don't need to be perfect here. It doesn't need to be a perfect circle. If anything, I think a perfect circle would perhaps look a little weird. So just cut off the corners and then do a sort of roundish shape is the best I can describe it. You don't want it to look too pristine, essentially, but you want to cut off the corners and have your sizes of your tree canopies in like largest to smallest, all looking sort of tree-esque, going to like quite small at the top and quite big at the bottom. So we've got a dowel painted brown. What we need to do is cut it to size. Now I'm just using a Stanley knife here. As I said, it's hardwood, so this does not cut very easily. You're not going to slice through it like it's nothing. You're going to have to essentially cut very hard, and it's quite difficult with a Stanley knife. Ideally you'd use a saw, but I don't want to use that because then you have to buy the saw and what have you. If you can cut it with a knife, and you can literally just snap the end of it, because the ends of this tree aren't really going to matter too much, so just feel free to like cut it the best you can and then snap it off, right? And once you've done that, we are like, this is a very, very simple process. Like, there's not much to this. Once we've got our tree canopy and we've cut them to the right shape, we're going to cut a hole in the canopy. Now, be careful here because we're using scissors, which are quite sharp. You could just use a knife. I know Blackmagicraft, he like sharpened his sticks so that they would actually just poke straight through it, and he wanted a pointy top. I'm not doing that here. Essentially, I'm just going to take the knife and stick a hole straight in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfectly in the middle because, again, it adds to the sort of lack of symmetry, if that makes sense, and that's what we're going for here. You could use a knife, as I said, but you want to cut a hole in all of them, except the very end, maybe 2 pieces. You don't necessarily want a hole there. And basically, we're just going to do a test. So what you want to do is is actually pile up your tree canopy bits at the side before you glue it all together. Make sure it all looks like you're happy with the order that you're going to put it on. You're happy with the shape that it basically looks like. Then you cut your holes in, and then you slide it on. Now, I slid it on first and then took it all off and then put the glue on. The downside to that is, because I didn't wait very long for my paint to dry, I sort of like rubbed some of the paint off. You could just wait longer than what I did, and I'm sure you'll be fine. Or, as I said, just glue it the first time. As long as you build it to the side, it'll look fine when you glue it on anyway. Once you've got all of your canopy on, right towards the top, I'm using super glue here, by the way. You could use PVA, but just be careful with PVA that you don't it doesn't get to the ends of the canopy, the scrubber material, because you don't want to be able to see it. You don't want it to look like hard on the edges. For the very top though, as I said, I didn't sharpen the top, I just left it as flat. What I'm going to do is sort of essentially glue my scouring pad on top of that, and then what I did was I got a very small piece that I wasn't actually planning on adding, and added that right to the very top just to sort of finish it off and give it that aesthetic. Now, the downside to this, when I actually cut my stick, I didn't cut it particularly, I cut it like too long, I didn't cut it short enough, so I sort of just like used the scissors to try and they were like quite bulky scissors to just snap off the bottom, which was fine. But ideally make sure you cut your stick to the right size, because once you've got all your canopy on, it's a pain in the backside. As I said, I rubbed some of the paint off. That's just me being rubbish. Now, for the base, what we're actually going to use, we've got a stick, it's looking pretty tree-like, you're pretty much done, you just need to base it, right? But to keep with the pound or cheap aesthetic, I'm using this Poor Hammer aesthetic. I'm using vinyl tile. Now, this vinyl tile, you can't get it everywhere, but in certain pound shops in the UK at least, you can get essentially what are floor tiles. They're designed to like peel off and you stick on the floor, and it gives the aesthetic as like tiles on your floor, even though it's actually vinyl. So we're going to use that. All I do is, I can't remember what I used to draw a circle, maybe at the bottom of a bottle. Just draw a circle on it and then cut out the circle. This literally cuts with scissors. It's very easy to use. Peel off the paper. Never forget to peel off the paper, because I once based my terrain on some of the paper and I was like, what an idiot, but there you have it. Take off the paper, and then what I'm going to do, and this is a little trick that you can use maybe like super glue and bicarbonate soda. I know that kind of stuff is fine, but what I like to do is, I think you Americans might call it poster tack, or basically if you're in the UK you'll know it as blue tack. You want to get a bit of blue tack, put it in the middle of your little circle, and then you're just going to put the tree in it. Now what you want to do is get super glue and put super glue on the blue tack or the poster tack, and then put the tree on it. And what this will do, the blue tack will sort of harden up, and it won't sway as much, it'll become solid. Now, I didn't necessarily use enough the first time around, and I recommend using quite a lot just to get it to stick, because essentially it's a stick sticking on something flat. If you just tried to glue that with PVA, it would fail miserably. You need either hot glue would be fine, a hot glue gun, or this method of white poster tack, blue tack. Use that and super glue, stick it on. Right, perfect. Let that dry if you can, because you want it to become firm. I'm a little bit lazy. I wanted to just knock this out because it's meant to be quick, cheap, Poor Hammer terrain. What I do is I take some filler, which is spackle for the Americans, and just texture the base. Texturing the base with the filler is very easy. You literally just whack it on, wet your finger, and try and do a bit of texture on it. fine. You could have textured the tree base like that if you wanted, but I didn't want to do that because I'm lazy. But you could if you've got that material. You don't necessarily even have to base it necessarily. You don't have to put the filler on. We could literally have just painted the base brown or green and then flocked it. It's whatever you've got to hand basically. But once I've got the filler on and I left that dry overnight, I came back, painted the base with the same colour brown. I didn't use a different brown because we're trying to keep it cheap, as we say. Paint it brown, let that dry. Then all I did was add a bit of white to that brown and dry brushed it up. Added a little bit more white, dry brushed it up. But then it doesn't really matter because I go and cover the whole thing with static grass. Static grass, I suspect a lot of you might have for your miniature bases. If you don't have any kind of flock whatsoever, you could just leave it brown. That's why I painted it brown. However, I'm just going to cover mine static grass because it's dead easy, and this is, I think, Army Painter's static grass or whatever, but GW's, whatever you've got would be fine. Any kind of flock would be fine. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's not the most amazing. I've rubbed some of the paint off, but it looks pretty. It looks like a tree. So that's it. I mean, the best thing I can say about it is that it looks like a tree. It's not the most amazing tree in the universe. I wouldn't recommend trying to flock this. And I think that's what like Black Magic crafted. I think if you're going to flock it, you might as well just buy the next materials up, and maybe buy the Woodland Scenic Armatures, and maybe buy some flock, because you've already got the flock if you are going to flock it, and then maybe a hairspray, something like that. Like, you can do it for cheap, which is what that other video was about, like my previous tree tutorial. But this is sort of like really, really cheap. The base was cheap. I got 4 of these tiles for £1. The trunk here is quite cheap. I think I'm not 100% sure of the price, £1 or £2 from B&Q for a massive, at least a metre long stick. Hardwood, a bit difficult to cut, but pretty fine. And then essentially the other materials like paint and flock and stuff like that. And then these scouring pads. And the scouring pads, Tesco, the local supermarket near me, had 5 of these sheets for £1.50, and that would very easily do 5 trees, probably 6 or 7 if you really wanted it to. So all in all, really cheap. Filler again is like £1 in the UK if you go to a pound shop, something like that, a budget store. So it looks like a tree. I'm not going to use these trees. I think that the other kind of tree is a better looking tree, but it is a lot more expensive in comparison, because, you know, this is £7 for 10 trees or whatever it is. The other kind of tree is essentially like, it's £18 I think, maybe just for the armatures for the tree. So I mean, you're already higher, and then you've got to buy your flock and all that kind of stuff. And I said my goal these days is I want to help people make better battlefields. That's my phrase, better battlefields. That's what I'm sticking with. Get used to it. It's sticking now. And that goes from like nothing to something to like medium, and then like medium to realistic, and everything in between. And I think this is a very decent option for very cheap, that doesn't take very long. You could easily get, like, apart from maybe the knife bit, you could get kids to help you cut that out maybe if you wanted. Maybe they could assemble them, what have you. Yeah, really, just really cheap, really, like I say, really effective, but it looks like a tree, and it's cheap. It's all right, I think. Yeah, you with me? You agree? Let me know in the comments below if you agree. I appreciate this isn't necessarily for everybody. The Poor Hammer series, as I said, people who are doing it on like an extreme budget, and I don't. That's not something that I think is unusual for people. The miniatures cost a lot, so having a decent table for cheap, pretty damn good. You could, with the vinyl tile, make a whole base out of this and have it like that be your area for your trees. I think I showed that at the end of the video. You could do that with the vinyl tile very easily. I think my tree might be a little bit wonky, but you know, who cares? But that's it. Let me know your thoughts. If I missed anything, I missed something, I do apologise. As I said, I know these trees have been done by Black Magic Craft. He did his with like gaps in between to make them look more like pine trees or fir trees. I'm not even sure the name. And I know like with KPS has done stuff like that. It's impossible to really create something from scratch that nobody's ever seen before, but I will try and leave links if I remember. I'm very bad at leaving links. Do like and subscribe though. Have a most beautiful day, and goodbye.